right, this is exciting time, and the Federal Reserve is coming live in a little bit. I want to make sure that the audio is working pretty good, so let me go and make sure that everything's all right. The audio does sound good. So, welcome to another public live stream session. And man, do we have some exciting stuff going on today with the Federal Reserve. They're going to make a decision today to either cut interest rates or keep the interest rate steady at 5.25 or 5.5%. And most of us are already predicting that the rates will remain the same at this FOMC meeting. But why should you care about this? Are the rates coming down to so that people can start buying their first homes lower than a 7% interest rate? And I said this in the last live stream about when we had the last FOMC meeting, that Congress and the White House are both stressed out about the Fed, because despite what Jerome Powell says about how he stays out of politics, what what the Fed decides to do today and going forward will have everything to do with this year's election season. Now, I want to show you this because it just happened. It's considered breaking news, I guess. I want to show you this and make sure this is correct. Okay. Make sure that is all right. So a little bit of breaking news that came out about 2 hours ago. The U.S. jobs opening fell to 8.5 million in March, which is the lowest level in more than 3 years. I want to explain a little bit more about the labor report throughout the live stream, but it is starting to become. We're starting to see a little bit more weaknesses in the economy, and it's not necessarily good news, right? And we're seeing a lot of layoffs that are happening throughout the country, especially in the tech sector that's been on the news. But it's not just the tech sector, but the financial sector. They're laying people off. So we're starting to see some tightening in the labor market. But let me just read this to you real quick, and this is coming from AP. So March was the lowest level in more than 3 years, but stayed at historically high levels, and a sign that the job markets remain resilient in the face of higher interest rates. The Labor Department reported Wednesday that employers posted 8.5 million vacancies in March, down from 8.8 million in February. But what we've been seeing lately is that it's just slowly kind of trending up, down, trend up and down. I wouldn't panic just yet from this labor data alone. But if we start to see more of a trend down going forward in April, May, June, July, then that could be a sign of the unemployment rate potentially going up even higher. Right now, it's still at 3.8%, and we're going to get the unemployment data on Friday morning. I'm not going to be live streaming on Friday, but when I do the CPI data next month, when I go live in the morning, and I will cover that as well. But the job openings are down sharply from a peak of 12.2 million in March 2022, but remain at a high level. And before 2021, they never exceeded 8 million jobs, a threshold they have now reached to 37 straight months. And the high level of job openings reflect a surprisingly strong U.S. labor market. When the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates in March 2022 to combat a resurgence in inflation, the higher borrowing costs were expected to tip the economy into recession and push up unemployment. So I've been talking about this in so many live streams, is that the unemployment rate's been going like this, right? About 3.8%. And the government and everybody is like, unemployment's fine. It's hanging out around 3.8. But then when the rates remain at a steady pace, let's say they keep it at 5.25, 5.5%, the unemployment rate will steadily climb up. And I'm going to show you some of the historical data later on in this live stream. So this is a very, very juicy live stream. Just stay tuned, and I'm going to be going over a lot of data in this video. But anyway, so inflation, right? So back in June 2022, it was at four-decade high at 9.1%. And then now it's down to about 3.5%. That's the CPI data. Now, remember, PCE inflation came out about 2.7%. I'm not going to jump ahead and get all over the place, but just kind of giving you what just got reported from the job opening in March. And that's going to be one of the questions that some of the reporters will ask Jerome Powell at the press conference, which is going to happen at 11:30, to discuss some of the things that, hey, are we going to drop interest rates because of, let's say unemployment started to go up to 4.2%, let's say 4.3, right? There has to be kind of a trend in order for the Fed to react. That's how it is with all of the government. If it just jumps from, let's say, 3.8% to 4.2% next month, they're going to be concerned, but they're not necessarily going to react to that. But if they see, let's say, 3.8% to 4% and goes to 4.2% and just, goes up by a little bit by every month, and I'm going to show you the data from the global recession from 2007 to 2009, then the Fed will probably react to it and just say, all right, we need to start cutting rates now. So anyway, now I want to show you this because the next time the Federal Reserve meet together, I want you guys to write this down on the calendar if you're a nerd like me, but make a note on your calendar because check this out. On June 12th at 5:30 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to get the CPI data or the inflation report from the month of May, and I'm going to be live streaming when that latest inflation report comes out. And then 5 hours later, on the same day, I'm going to be on live stream again when the Fed announces its decision as to whether it will raise interest rates, keep them steady, or surprise us by dropping them by 25 basis points. So mark it on your calendar if you haven't already, because that is going to be right in the middle of 2024 and about 5 months before the election day. Are they going to delay rate cuts until July 31st or possibly September 18th? The Fed meeting on November 7th is 2 days after the election day on November 5th. So I think, what I'm going to be paying more attention to is that the one today, the one on June 12th, another one on July 31st, and then the one before the election day on September 18th. And this is another breaking news from the conference board. It just came out yesterday that consumer confidence fell sharply in April as inflation worries and a downbeat outlook on the job market pushed optimism to its lowest level since 2022. And a lot of people, including myself, and I'm not much of a conspiracy theory kind of guy, but we're starting to become suspicious about the jobs report that has been coming out this year. And I'm trying not to sound all like, what Gen Z or younger kids say, sus, right? People are getting laid off, especially in the tech sector. And if you remember earlier this year, just in January, over 25,000 people got laid off in just 1 month in the tech sector. And every company is going through a tightening cycle right now. And Google just announced that they're laying people off. Tesla, Apple, Amazon, and other big techs are also announcing layoffs. Sony is laying off 900 workers from the PlayStation division. Expedia is cutting 1,500 jobs. EA or Electronic Arts, like EA Sports, is laying off 5% of its workforce. And IBM, a huge tech company, is slashing jobs in marketing and communications. And check this out. Layoff announcements in February hit their highest level in the month since 2009 or the global financial crisis. That's not good, right? And this is a total of about 85,000 planned job cuts, which is an increase of 3% from January and 9% from the same month a year ago, especially in the tech and financial sectors. The banking sector, even JP Morgan Chase, they're laying people off as well. So this is making people extremely nervous about the labor market, despite what the labor report says. The consumer confidence index, this one I'm going over right now, or CCI, declined to 97 in April, which was far below the expectations from economists for 104 and lower than March's reading of 103.1. And let me quote what the chief economist said. Excuse me, in the press release. Consumers became less positive about the current labor market situation and more concerned about future business conditions, job availability, and income. And this is even more interesting when they ask consumers how they're doing with their financial conditions. Most of them answered that they're in a good place, but when they were asked about the overall economic condition, they were not as confident about the future. And this is troubling news for the people in the White House, people in Congress, right? People tend to vote people out when economy isn't doing so well. And that's always been the repeated pattern in the past. And this is something that Jerome Powell will most likely address at the press conference. But if he doesn't, somebody in the crowd will ask him that question for sure, right? If I'm wrong, then man, I need to take a shot of whiskey or something if I got it wrong. But we've been in a high interest rate economy for quite some time now. The Fed has maintained the current Fed funds rate of 5.25 to 5.5% since July 26, 2023. And low consumer confidence can be bad because it can lead to decreased spending, which can negatively impact small businesses, profit margins, and even stock prices going forward. When people spend less money, it could lead to an economic slowdown or even a recession. And people in the White House, again, and Congress are paying very close attention to the CCI numbers because low levels of consumer confidence can impact the outcome of the 2024 elections. And not to mention, I know this is like a series of bad news, and I'm sorry about this, and I'm not trying to sound all bearish, but it's a string of bad news. All right. The first quarter of GDP came in a lot lower than expected in the second estimate. So let me first show you what the Commerce Department just said about the GDP, and it's not good news. The advanced GDP estimate on Thursday for Q1 2024 was a 1.6% annualized rate, which was far below the forecast at 2.4% after growing at a 3.4% rate in the fourth quarter of 2023. So the US economy grew at its slowest pace in almost 2 years in the first quarter due to a surge in imports and a small buildup of unsold goods at businesses. So we talked about the unfair trades going on, right? We got more imports coming in than going out. So despite what you hear on the news, we don't actually know if we had a real recession until many months after the fact when COVID shut down our economy. Not that we're in a recession right now. Anyway, let me clarify that. We're not in a recession right now because we need to have 2 negative GDP back-to-back quarter. The government might tell you that they have their own GDP, recession definition. But anyway, when COVID shut down our economy, we knew that our unemployment rate has spiked in March and April of 2020. We knew that far in advance because, they shut down the economy, right? So everybody had to stay home. But we didn't know until many months later that we for sure had a negative GDP in back-to-back quarters, also known as a recession. We all could have guessed that we were in a recession, but it's not official until many months later. And typically, we get an advanced estimate of the GDP of about a month after the quarter ends. And this is the estimate based on the best available information available at the time, right? The advanced estimate came in at 1.6% on April 25th, which was about a week ago. Then on June 27th, right here, that's when we get the third estimate for the Q1 GDP, which will incorporate, which is pretty much the final data and additional data that wasn't available in the previous estimate with more accuracy. And we could even have a lower GDP than what it is now at 1.6, or maybe even a higher GDP based on the new data. We'll see. We're going to find out on the Q2 GDP estimate, not until September 26 down here in the middle. And I'm curious to find out if it's going to trend downward going into Q3 and Q4. And if we see any weaknesses in our GDP, then the Fed may not have a choice but to start cutting rates, even if the PCE inflation rate is above the central bank's expectations. And I bet you that someone during the press conference will ask Jerome Powell about the GDP as well. And speaking of inflation, everybody's favorite subject, another bad news. This is what the Fed is really frustrated about, and that's the PCE inflation coming in hotter at 2.7% in the month of March when it was 2.5% in January and February. And this is the one thing the Federal Reserve is paying attention to, and why everybody else is saying that the Fed is not looking to cut interest rates anytime soon. And what they're really worried about right now is another spike in inflation. And that's another thing that Jerome Powell is going to talk about in his press conference today. And they're really worried about the April numbers as well, because if that's going to 2.5, 2.7, let's say it goes to 2.9, right? Now the Fed is going to be like, man, should we even consider cutting rates in 2024 if people continue to spend money? that would be a discussion, right? And here's what Jerome Powell said a few weeks ago. He said, PC inflation, or it, he said that inflation will take longer than expected to achieve the confidence needed to get inflation down to the central bank's 2% target. And that was a signal to the market or stock market that it will take longer for the Fed to cut rates in 2024. And some of us are suspecting that they might not even cut rates in 2024 at all. And that would be bad news for people who are looking to purchase their first home, hoping to get their interest rates at 6% or lower. And are we going to go back to the way it was, like 2% or 3% with the mortgage interest rates? Very unlikely. And I think we have to expect the rates to be at around 4 at the best, or maybe above 5% going forward. And I'm going to explain why we are so used to the lower rates for the last 15 years in a little bit. Let me take a break from the Fed just real quick. I do want to look at the chats and stuff. Let me know where you guys are watching this from. If you're watching this on replay, I will make sure to put the timestamps in the description below, so you can navigate the Q&As and other source materials. But in about 20 minutes, is it 20 minutes? No, in about 13 minutes, the Fed is going to announce its decision to maintain its interest rates at 5.25 to 5.5%. Or are they going to surprise us with a rate cut? Highly unlikely. But you have to remember that the Fed cutting interest rates so soon is not necessarily a good thing. Like I just showed you all the data and they're all looking pretty negative, right? It could mean that there's some economic weaknesses coming up in 2024, like we're starting to see now with the GDP, consumer confidence, and mass layoffs. And then in less than an hour at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time or 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be live streaming Jerome Powell's press conference and the Q&As he's going to get from the reporters. And trust me when I say his words matter, they really matter. And the press conference should last about an hour. But I'm going to go over the Q&As with you guys throughout this live stream. So feel free to put them in the live chat if you want to. And this is being live streamed to both Facebook and Instagram using StreamYard. But anyway, let me know where you guys are watching this from. And I go live every other Wednesday to talk about the financial independence and retire early movement, and as well as any breaking news with the stock market, the Fed, or inflation, or if the government shuts down, right? And I go in depth about the 401k Roth IRA and other stock market investments with my financial independence calculators, which you can download for absolutely free, along with my other financial resources by visiting firesightshed.com/resources. And if you're interested in joining my private client program to get one-on-one financial coaching services with me, or one-on-two couple sessions like many of my current clients do, you can schedule a free consultation with me by visiting firesightshed.com/coaching. And stay tuned, because I'm going to give out 5 free channel membership only on YouTube, though. I had to clarify that because I didn't clarify that on during the last live stream, and people watching from Facebook and Instagram, they were like, where's my free membership? There's no membership on Meta, Facebook, and Instagram. But my membership will give you early access to the videos that are not published to the public audience just yet. And I will reply to the comments from members you put in the videos. So stay tuned if you want to become one of the lucky ones to become my free channel member. And you can always follow me on Instagram if you want to know what's going on behind the scenes and stay up to date on my content. And before I get back to the main content here, I want to show you this. I thought it was a really good, cool picture. If you guys know who that is, that's Dave Ramsey. I went to this video conference, or not video conference, in-person conference called Grow with Video Live. And it was just all about YouTube and, how to create more videos, how to advertise videos, how to make the videos a little bit better. It was an absolute blast meeting Dave Ramsey. And I don't know if you know who that is. That's Cody Sanchez. Met Sean Cannell. I don't post a lot of behind the scenes footage on YouTube, but I had to post a picture of Dave Ramsey and me because I thought that was pretty cool. And I walked up to him and said, hey, Dave, I paid off $110,000 in debt back in 2015, and now I'm financially independent. And his response was like, you just like how you would hear on the radio. He was just like, wow, holy cow, man. And I just thought it was cool. And You can agree or disagree with his fundamentals. I do respect the fact that he's been consistently teaching people get out of debt, and he's been doing this for like 40 years. And what he's been doing is teaching people common sense in personal finance. And what I'm teaching you guys watching my videos is really answering your specific questions about your financial journey and get into the specific numbers, like how to calculate them. And that could be about your 401k, Roth IRA, HSA, your kids 529, or how much you invest to retire early. And you don't have to agree with everything I say, just like I don't agree with everything Dave Ramsey says, right? But anyway, all right, that's enough of that. And let me get back to the main subject here. Okay, so let me get to this. Anyway, let's go back to the main topic for today. Let me pull up the CME Fed Watch Tool right here. And we have a Fed meeting today, obviously, and that's why you're tuning in. And then the next one is in June, right? June 12th. And then another one in July, then September. I highly doubt. And if you look at this chart here, 97.5% chance that the Fed is not going to cut interest rates today. But after today, we still have 5 more Fed meetings remaining in 2024. So there's always a chance that the Fed might not cut interest rates at all until 2025. And I would be very shocked if the Fed decided to do that. And I could see more of a potential rate cut in July now, or maybe September. Just I know that's not something you want to hear, but here we are, right? So inflation is still higher than the normal. But even for June 2024, whenever it decides to load, yeah, we're still looking at 93.6% chance. That's what the market is pricing in, that the rates will remain the same as where it is. And then in July, they're looking more like 80% chance that the rates will remain the same. But remember, by September 18th, that is the last time that the Fed gets to cut rates before the election day, unless they have like an emergency meeting, like they did during COVID. But September is what we're looking at, what the market is looking at to cut rates at about 25 basis points. And there's a 37% chance of doing that. And it's interesting. There's like a 6.4% chance that they're going to cut rates by 50 basis points. We'll see what happens. That would be really, really interesting. And then not until November, they're going to cut rates possibly, right? This is all like how the market is pricing in. Might be cutting rates down to 475 or 500 or 5%. And then by December, there's a good chance that the 25% chance that we're going to keep the rates where they are now. So that would be really interesting if that happens. But anyway, and again, the Fed cuts, cutting interest rates because of spiking unemployment and dropping in GDP, then that's not a good thing. That means we got a tough time ahead, right, with a possible recession. But it would make sense for the Fed to slowly cut interest rates when they see the inflation rate reaching between 2 and 2.5% with a healthy unemployment rate and job growth. And if I were a Fed governor, I would probably just cut the rates by 25 basis points, one meeting at a time. And if you're wondering when the interest rates will come down, let me see how much time I got. I got about 5 minutes. So let me go through the Fed funds rate history just real quick before they make the announcement. You can buy a house. If you're wondering when the interest rates will come down, so you can buy a house with maybe 5% interest rate, let me just show you the history of the Fed funds rate right here. Oh man, I closed that. Sorry. There we go. So at the peak of our economy, this is back in 2006. Okay. The Fed funds rate was at 5.25%. Does that sound familiar? That's where we are right now. Then in September 2007, they started to cut rates by 50 basis points to 4.75%. Then they started cutting interest rates by 25 basis points for the rest of 2007. Then in 2008, the Fed got more aggressive by cutting interest rates by 75 basis points, 50 basis points, 75 points, and then 25 points down from 4.75% to 2% right there. That's pretty insane, right? Let me know in the comment section down below if you still remember how things transpired from 2008 to 2009. Then in late 2008, when our economy was at its worst, the Fed cut interest rates down to 0%. Remember that this also happened in 2020 when COVID-19 shut down our economy. The Federal Reserve had to have an emergency meeting on the weekend to cut interest rates. And then it wasn't until 2015, okay, 7 years later, when the Fed started to raise interest rates 25 basis points at a time. And it wasn't just 25 basis points every month. It was like 25 to 75 basis points every year. And we were so used to having such a low interest rate for over a decade, 2 decades, right? Because it took so long to recover from the global recession. And now we're going to see a low mortgage rate again. Not anytime soon, maybe one day, but we could see a 5% again if they hold a Fed funds rate at 2.5 to 3% in 2026, like what the summary of economic projections said in March 2024. And some people in my comment section, you know what? I'm going to skip that in, we've got about 1 minute before it releases. So I'll be right back. Let me go ahead and play a YNAB video right here. Be back in 30 seconds because I want to switch this. Oh, I didn't get to upload that YNAB video. Oh, well. Do I have 3 minutes? I do have 3 minutes. Okay. You know what? Let me go through the comments real quick. I'm going to go over the unemployment rate in a little bit, but Federal Reserve, I'm going to pull that up real quick. And I'm going to pull up Bloomberg.
Number would correlate with lower wage growth, probably closer to 3%.
They're about to make that announcement.
And it's our expectation that that will happen over time. So I think the emphasis has to be on wage gains rather than on just the nominal growth in jobs.
Kathy, this was great. It's good to hear from you. Kathy Jones there of Charles Schwab going into that Fed decision. 2.5 minutes away. 30 minutes after that, news conference with Chairman Powell.
Thanks for tuning in.
Michael
I really appreciate you being here.
Your thoughts?
I wanted to ask her what she's telling clients to do in their portfolios.
What are you telling clients to do? What are you actually doing?
This is your chance to get in.
I usually don't show this comment, but
real
let me touch on that subject later on in the live stream. Just remind me.
We're in a soft landing. You're going to get conflicting messages. The Fed will be confused.
I hope not, but there is a chance. But then, you know, it's all speculation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was here a couple of weeks ago, I talked about a washout.
I do not hold gold.
To the FOMC meeting.
I'm with Warren Buffett on that. It doesn't pay dividends.
Cash to work.
I mean, it would be nice one day to just
yields coming in a couple of basis points. That
have
decision 2 minutes away.
gold
Let's go
bar
through the price
in my
action together and
safe and
start with
just
the
to say
equity
I have
market. We'll go
one,
through the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, the Russell. Think about how we
But
started
it is a good
last
hedge.
month. We came out of March and into April, and everyone started to say it's time to get into the rotation. Look outside of mega cap tech. Look to small caps, for instance.
We are definitely seeing a lot more job losses coming this year.
Hammered.
These are the companies more leveraged to rates staying higher for longer that get more impacted from that. So it raises this question, can you get a rotation trade with rates staying where they are? Some people, like what we heard from Max Kennedy today, was like,
from Lakeland, Florida.
Buy everything because you know what? They're high for the right reasons. And that seems to
be. Any changes on your TSP? Yes, I will. I can cover that later on.
As well. This idea of getting
I do have a TSP price tracker, and I will show you guys that later on after
the reason we're having
interest
this
rate
debate right
decision
now is we're
here.
begging for a Fed, John, to get out front and be ex-ante. There's
Nasdaq
no
5-year prediction
whatsoever that any major central bank can ex-ante at their peril. They're going to be ex-post. They're going to wait and wait and wait, and then finally, Bob Michael will have a payday
this afternoon, and we hope he gets that payday. We have to share it too. But this afternoon, it is price up, yield down, going into this decision. Let's bring up the bond move and look at the 2-year, the 10-year, the 30-year. The 10-year is down about 4 basis points on the session. These are the scores. 464.27 becomes 464.48. The 2-year, 5.01%, down 2 basis points on the day, up 40 since the Fed last met. If we switch up the board and finish on foreign exchange going into this Fed decision, hello, dollar yen. This is one to watch. This is not just about America. It's about the rest of the world as well. Dollar yen at the moment approaching 158, 157, 64 with your Fed decision.
There we go.
Here's Mike McKee.
Short and simple, a change in the statement, but no change in rates. The economic overview remains the same, word for word, with solid growth, strong job gains, and inflation that's eased over the past year, but remains elevated. And then a new line. In recent months, there has been a lack of further progress toward the committee's 2% inflation objective. Still, the statement says risks to achieving its employment and inflation goals have, quote, moved toward better balance over the past year, putting the assessment in the past tense and adding over the past year. The additions to the statement would seem to ratify the market's view that there will not be 3 rate cuts this year, if any at all. The statement's view that the committee does not believe it would be appropriate to reduce rates until it's gained further confidence inflation is moving toward target is unchanged. Now, the long-awaited balance sheet taper is here. The Treasury roll-off cap will drop from $60 billion to $25 billion a month starting on June 1st. Officials had suggested it would be lowered to $30 billion. As expected, no change in the $35 billion cap on mortgage-backed securities. However, any maturing securities over the cap will be reinvested in treasuries rather than MBS. The vote, unanimous. And that's it.
Mike McKee, thank you, sir. Stay close. Let's run through this price action. Mike McKee's going to run into that news conference in just a moment. Equities recovering just a little bit, still down on the session. But
S&P 500 is just flat.
Retention, of course, immediately turning to what's happening in the bond market. In the bond market at the moment.
Let me just mute them real quick. I'm not going to read the statement again. I mean, he pretty much summarized it, and they do have a press conference coming up in about 28 minutes. And I do want to go over some of the things, some of the indicators that we're seeing that could potentially be some weaknesses in our economy. So let me just go back to the NASDAQ 5-year prediction. So I'm always investing, so I'm not really worried about what's going to happen in 5 years, but I do pay attention to the lagging and leading indicators in our economy, right? So do I trade? No. Do I invest more when there's weakness? Yes. And do I do some options every once in a while? That's more of a betting, right? So, but I'm very, very careful with what I do to kind of invest in the long term. So I'm always looking at the long-term growth. And if I am, like, let's say 3 years out from retirement, then that's something that I do want to pay more attention to make sure that I do have enough cash reserve. I have enough, not just kind of like maybe becoming more risk averse at that point. But yeah, it's hard to say, hey, NASDAQ in 5 years is going to double, right? People could say that, but I'm not the type of guy to kind of tell you that. Hey, man, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Air Force veteran here. Give me a shout out if you're a veteran. Yeah, just connect with me. Just go to firesidechat.com/coaching. And you get your first session for free. So we can definitely talk about your TSP and all that. Speaking of TSP, I am going to pull up and tell you how TSP is doing for the year. And yeah, I'm not sure if you guys are going to be happy about that. Let me double check. Where is it? Is it finance? TSP tracker. Okay, let me show you guys this. It's pretty cool. I made this and it's connected to my website, and the TSP prices gets updated every single day. And you can go to firesidechat.com/resources, and you go to the membership dashboard. It's free for you to get, and you can see how your TSP is doing. So it depends on if you have a life cycle fund or if you have, individual funds, C fund, S fund, I fund. F fund by far is doing the worst at 3.2%, negative 3.2%. The C fund is doing about 6%, and S fund is just flat we'll just call that flat. All right, 0.0 to 0%. And I fund, surprisingly, is outperforming the S fund, but there's been a pullback in the last couple months. The earnings haven't been the greatest, and the S&P 500 is just kind of there are some laggers going on right now. But you can go to my website and check it out. How I allocate right now, I'm still, C fund, S fund for me. Not personalized financial advice, obviously. You want to make sure that you do your due diligence and make sure that you understand every time you put your money, a certain percentage to a individual fund, or let's say life cycle fund, you have to understand that risk exposure that you're putting yourself out there. So just check it out. Check it out on the website when you get a chance. And and for you guys still have TSP, this is a really good tool for you to use. And again, it's free. It's free. I'm going to say that again. It's free. It's not a scam if it's free. All right. So let me pull this just real quick. Somebody else asked a question. Let me make sure I didn't. Oh yeah, a touchy subject. I'm gonna briefly touch on this just real quick because I never talk politics on my channel. I'm very neutral when it comes to politics, but you may not be wrong about this. It's interesting because the Republicans on the right side, they are telling Jerome Powell to, hey, just keep your rates high, right? Democrats on the other side, they're saying, no, I need you to start cutting interest rates. So I'm not sure if the outcome of this election is, it's going to depend on how people feel about our current economy. And it's been like that since inception, right? It was towards the end of Bush's era, George W. Bush in 2008, and Obama came into the office right in the middle of a recession, right? And 2008 election was done. It was like at the height of 10% unemployment in December. And then when he was inaugurated in January 2009, that's when all the stimulus checks started to happen and try to create more jobs and stuff like that. So are we going to see that again? Maybe one day. Are we going to see that this year? I don't know. But people do decide how they're going to vote based on our current economic condition. And I do want to show you this unemployment rate right here, which is a little concerning, but show you regardless. I'm not trying to make you guys panic or anything, but I'm just showing you guys the data. All right. Some people in my comment section and on other people, finance YouTubers in their comment section are advocating for a long-term recession. And trust me when I say that a long-term recession is always worse than inflation. When the unemployment rate went to about 10% right there, okay? It was in 2009 during the global recession. It took our entire economy until 2018 right here to get down to 3.8%. That's almost 9 years. How long did it take inflation to calm down by raising interest rates? It peaked in 2022, but it really started in October 2021 when the government sent out stimulus checks without targeting a specific audience, right? But it didn't take 9 years to bring inflation back down from 9% to 3%, right? I'm not saying that the things are not expensive anymore. They're still expensive because we're in the year 2024, but all the goods and services that we're paying right now are in the 2026, 2027 level. Like we should not be seeing these prices for many, many years later, but here we are. What we don't want to see is deflation. Deflation is worse than inflation, right? We saw that in 2008, and let me know if you guys remember 2008, right? I know it feels like so long ago, but people do forget what it was like to go through that long-term recession. Anyway, the biggest mistake that I believe the government made at the time during COVID was rushing a decision to push stimulus checks out to the American people without specifically targeting low-income families. That's just my personal opinion. I don't think there should have been stimulus checks for people making over, let's say, $200,000 a year, dual income household or something like that. They should have probably targeted more at a certain income level, but they felt like they were pretty rushed to get to where they are to send those checks out. And I want to show you guys this. I want to go in depth a little bit. All right. If you look at this chart here, oh, I messed that up. Okay, that's all right. So take a look and see here from 2009, 2010. Okay. And I want to see if I can change this to 2005 real quick. Can I go back to 2005? I can. Okay. Let's go to January 2025. Okay. So this is 2005 to 2000 and let's go to now in 2024, March 31st, or I'm sorry, March 1st, 2024. Okay. Now, let's go all the way back to 2005 and the Fed funds rate at 2.5% and the unemployment rate was at about 5.4%. So the green line here is the unemployment rate, and the blue line is the Fed funds rate, and the red line that you can barely see, that is the PCE inflation rate. The Fed funds rate in 2005 started with 3% and then finished with 4%. Okay, the Fed funds rate continued to increase into 2006 and 2007 to 5.25%, like where we are now. But unemployment rate maintained at around about 4%. It wasn't until December, right here, 2007, when the unemployment rate hit 5%. Then in October 2008, we actually experienced, let me go back here, right there. We actually experienced deflation right there in the negative, while the unemployment rate increased to 6.5%. That was when the whole economy was on the brink of a complete collapse. There was so much fear and uncertainty in the market. Then unemployment rate peaked at 10% a year later in October 2009, but unemployment rate didn't get below 9% until 2 years later in 2011. That's how devastating a long-term recession could be for the whole country. And people who graduated college during those years, millennials like me, could not find a decent job. And it was a very long recovery from 2009 all the way to 2016, when unemployment finally reached below right there at about 4%. Okay. So that was when the Federal Reserve started to raise interest rates as well. They know this. Jerome Powell knows this. They don't want a recession. If they keep the rates where they are now, or if they raise the rates, then we could see more weaknesses in our economy. But it takes a lot longer to recover from a long-term recession. Okay, so how do you prepare for a potential weakness in the economy? You need to start taking control of your finances today. You don't need to panic and sell everything. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't want you to sell stocks because you're like, oh man, stock market crash is coming, or the bear market's coming. That's not what I'm saying at all. When the stock market took a big hit in 2022, I had the extra cash to buy stocks at a discount because I always have a cash allocation strategy to buy additional assets when the market is down. When my 401k and Roth IRA were down 10, 15, 20, and 25%, I continue to dollar cost average my investments. I never stopped buying. As a matter of fact, I bought more assets in 2022 than I did in any other year. If you're trying to achieve financial independence and retire early, the FIRE movement, buying assets in a weak economy will get you there a lot quicker. And did I stop buying when stocks were down 20%? No, I bought even more because I focus on the long-term growth. And don't ever be comfortable with where you are. And let me explain to you what that means. You have to continue to grow yourself and get outside of the comfort zone. And I didn't get my bachelor's degree until I was 34 because I was not the brightest guy in high school. And I made several life decisions that delayed it. But I worked my butt off to work and take classes at the same time to get that degree. But before that, I worked on so many professional certificates and built hours to get to where I am today. And I partner with CourseCareers because I know they're one of those places where you can get your certificates to potentially earn 6 figures in salary. And I'll put that link in the description below so that you can sign up for free classes if you're interested. But I've been on my FIRE journey for a while. And I can tell you that there are only so many expenses that you can reduce. I mean, people can tell you that, oh yeah, you can stop drinking Starbucks coffee. I never do anyway. But that really, saves you, let's say $20 a month or let's say $50 a month. What you really need to work on is increasing your income, right? The fastest way, thumbs up. The fastest way to grow your wealth is to reduce your expenses first and then increase your income to increase your margin. Charlie Munger said to do whatever it takes to save your first $100,000. And that's what I did. You have to want it, or you're always going to be stuck where you are. And I can't predict when the recession is going to happen. I can't predict when there will be a stock market crash, but I can always be prepared for unemployment and reduce profit margin on my business by having enough cash reserve. I'm paying attention to the labor market, like I'm showing you right now. PC inflation and the GDP, because I don't want to be surprised like I was in 2008 and 2009. If you're a W-2 employee, you should have at least 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside in cash in case you get fired or you get laid off. If you're retired and you're living on your investments, I always recommend having at least 12 to 18 months of cash set aside, depending on the number of income streams you have. And if you're a 1099 contractor or a business owner like me, you should have a separate cash reserve to pay your employees or necessary expenses if your revenue and net profit start to take a hit. Do not wait until things get worse for your business and start taking out debt that you can't repay. And that's how small businesses collapse. And if for you business owners, I want you to hear this quote from Sir Richard Branson. Train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't have to. If you're a business owner, you should always treat your employees like how you want to be treated by others. And I'm always treating mine with respect because everybody on my team is contributing to the growth of my business. If my business is going to hurt for a while due to a recession, I'm going to try my best to take care of the people who helped me build this business, right? Okay, a little bit of rant, I guess. But let me give out 5 free channel membership as promised. And then in about 12 minutes, Jerome Powell is going to be. Okay. Yeah, pretty excited about that. And I'm going to go over some of the Q&As here. You're right. And I'm not talking about we're going to go through an 08 style recession. We learned that lesson, right? And I agree with you on that. But I think we should be prepared. You should always be prepared. And some people tell me that, oh, my jobs are safe. Nobody's jobs are ever safe. That's just my take. Even if you're working if you're in the military, you're a federal government, especially federal employees, you guys know this. There's, furloughs happen, government shutdown happens. You don't get paid, then what? They don't care. They could help you. Maybe they'll give you a back pay later on, but then you still want to have that emergency savings set aside so that you're always ready to for the unexpected, right? So channel membership just gave those out. Congrats. All right. So first question of the day. Let me make sure that the Federal Reserve is ready to go before. So I'm going to be using CNBC today to go over that. You know what? Let me go ahead and do this, and this. Cash is king. Cash is king. When the market is down, you got to have cash. If you're cash poor, how are you going to buy more assets, right? How are you going to do that? All right. Let me see here. Okay. Instagram folks, Facebook. Okay. Let me drag the question over here. I know I'm only been kind of talking to you guys on YouTube. It's kind of hard to pay attention to all 3 platforms. Okay. All right. Would compound? Okay, this is a good question. Would compound interest work better if all of my retirement accounts are combined into one account? I have a 401k for my previous employer and a 401k in my current employer. No. Okay. Great question. A lot of people actually ask that. Like, should I combine my 401ks or IRAs so that the money will grow faster? No, the compounding is a multiplier. And I'm not going to I'm not going to give you the breakdown of compound interest formula because most of you would probably fall asleep watching me. But this is actually a really good question. So let's say you have $200 and you have 2 accounts that earn 10% each in the same exact index fund or whatever, right? So you put $150 in one account, $50 in the second account. The dollars will still grow at the same exponential rate, no matter how much you start with. Remember the rule of 72. If your investment makes 10% annually, it will take 7.2% or 7.2 years to double your investments, because if you divide 72 by 10, that gives you 7.2. Let me actually show you the spreadsheet comparison, because I actually just explained this to one of my clients last week. And if you want to join my private client program to get out of debt, invest, and save for your early retirement, you can schedule a first session with me and that's free, by visiting firestatechair.com/coaching. But anyway, let me go ahead and show you the spreadsheet I have. Hold on one second here. Is that the right one? It is the right one. Okay, so you can download this spreadsheet on my website at firestatechair.com/resources. This one is a little bit modified, but let me walk you through this, okay? So let's say you have $25,000 on the left-hand side. I actually just used this for my client. If you have, let's say, $25,000 in your old 401k, and then you have $15,000 in your current 401k. So no matter what you do, let's say you invest exactly the same. You have the same 401k fees, and you're investing in the same exact mutual fund in either account. Okay. So if you do 15,000 here and you do 25,000 here, and let's say it's 8% average annual return on both sides, both accounts, right? It is still going to be the same. Okay. This is the total balance by, let's say, what is that? By age 40, you would still have $93,000 if you don't have anything invested. All right. So let me switch the numbers around, and I'm going to keep the same total number. All right. Because the total number is $40,000. So if I do, let's say, 22,500, and then I put 12,500. Ooh, nope, 17,500. Sorry. You see that? The number remains the same. You still get $93,000 by the time you're 40. Remember that compound interest is a multiplier, right? The only time that they don't match is if one of your 401k accounts charges you, let's say, 1% in fees, and the other one charges you 1.25%. Then you're going to see the performance differences, okay? But if you're investing in the same exact mutual fund between those two, you're going to get the same result. I hope that makes sense. Great question. When you do the comparison, this is like one of those that you can kind of like, should I put them in both? Yeah, I would just combine what you have from the 401k, the old 401k, into the new 401k, because you have what's called a rule of 55. Because let's say you turn 55 in 5 years and you have an old 401k, you can't touch the old 401k because you already left that job. But if you move money out of that old 401k into a new 401k, now you get to combine both of them. Let's say this is $40,000. That's the money you can gain access to starting at the age of 55, because you put it in the current 401k account. Okay. So check it out. Just I'm not saying that you should always put it in the 401k to 401k. It really depends on your situation. It might make more sense if you have a Roth 401k and put that into a Roth IRA, right? Because Roth 401k, you don't really want to do that rule of 55 with a Roth 401k, because you're still going to be penalized for the earnings and interest. But if you put Roth 401k into a Roth IRA, then you can take the contributions out early at any time, but you can kind of segregate contributions and earnings and interest separately in the Roth IRA as opposed to in the Roth 401k. I got a video coming out tomorrow. It's going to be pretty juicy. Kind of the title is How to Retire Early Only with 401k. So you're going to get a lot of rules, definitions, 5-year rule, and all that stuff explained in that video. So check it out. Really great question, though. It's just one of those things that, math question, right? It's can be complicated. It may seem like, man, this is going to grow a lot faster if I just combine them all. But anyway, okay. So I'm going to get on Fed Chairman here because he is on time, unlike some other politicians. He is actually very, very on time. So let me make sure that I can do this. Okay, he's not ready yet, so it's in 4 minutes, so we'll see. Oh, okay. Wow. Quit your IRS job. Are you an IRS agent? Okay. I didn't know the IRS was doing a remote job too. What are you doing now? Let me know. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Not the best. Working on it. Some improvement needed, but yeah, just let's see. Yeah. You can go to this from Instagram. You can go to firesidechat.com/resources to get all those spreadsheets that I just showed you. I have financial independence calculator on there. I have my debt-free calculator on there. All my clients use that. You can download it if you want to figure it out on your own. But if you want to have more of a one-on-one coaching with me, then you can go to firesidechat.com/coaching, and everybody gets a free session the first time. And that's when I get to know you to make sure that I am the right fit for your needs and your wants. I may not be the ideal person to help you out, right? And you may not be the ideal person, ideal client for me, because let's say you have everything that you need, and you might need like a CPA as opposed to a financial coach or a financial planner, that sort of thing. So, okay, 2 minutes left. Okay, let me drag another question here. Yeah. Oh, okay. Rule of 72 again. Rule of 72. Oops. Is how long it takes the stock market or your portfolio to double, right? So 72. Let's say your portfolio is making 8% average annual return. So you do 72 divided by 8. That gives you 9. So about 9 years is how long it takes your portfolio to go from 100,000 to 200,000, 200,000 to 400, 800,000, 1.6 million. That's how you can calculate that. It kind of gives you a better idea of, all right, I want to grow let's say my kids 529 from today until 2034, 10 years from now. And my target goal is to have, I don't know, $100,000 for my child. Then how much can you start investing now in lump sum in order for you to achieve that? So you need to look at the historical performances. And let's say you do S&P 500, that gives you 12% average annual return. Then you can do 72 divided by 12. But then that's all historical performance, right? We don't know for sure that that's really going to happen. So just want to make sure that you're aware of it. Let me make sure that the CNBC is okay. Come on, Jerome. But yeah, look up rule of 72 when you get a chance. Come on, man. It's taking forever. Might have to agree with you on that. I hate to know. Oh, here he goes. Okay, let me see. He's late. So unlike him to be late. if you're a veteran, if you're not there 15 minutes early, you're late, right? I used to hate that. It's like, dude, my appointment's at 9 a.m. Why do I have to be there by 8:45? You know? Really? I wouldn't do that. Well, not me, right? I'm not doing that. I didn't know you said that. That's interesting. 6 to 8%? Wow. The Trinity study said 4% with 100% stocks could last you, what, over 30 years success rate? Yeah. And like I said, I mean, when I met him, uh, I think he's still a very good, he he's been around the financial community for a while, right? And he's teaching people how to get out of debt, teaching people budget, right? Those are the two basic things that everybody needs to do is to budget and pay off debt. 60% of Americans are not doing that. So here he goes.
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. The economy has made considerable progress toward our dual mandate objectives. Inflation has eased substantially over the past year, while the labor market has remained strong. And that's very good news. But inflation is still too high. Further progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain. We are fully committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal. Restoring price stability is essential to achieve a sustainably strong labor market that benefits all. Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings, though at a slower pace. Our restrictive stance of monetary policy has been putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation, and the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have moved toward better balance over the past year. However, in recent months, inflation has shown a lack of further progress toward our 2% objective, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. Although GDP growth moderated from 3.4% in the fourth quarter of last year to 1.6% in the first quarter, private domestic final purchases, which excludes inventory investment, government spending, and net exports, and usually sends a clearer signal on underlying demand, was 3.1% in the first quarter, as strong as the second half of 2023. Consumer spending has been robust over the past several quarters, even as high interest rates have weighed on housing and equipment investment. Improving supply conditions have supported resilient demand and the strong performance of the U.S. economy over the past year. The labor market remains relatively tight, but supply and demand conditions have come into better balance. Payroll job gains averaged 276,000 jobs per month in the first quarter, while the unemployment rate remains low at 3.8%. Strong job creation over the past year has been accompanied by an increase in the supply of workers, reflecting increases in participation among individuals aged 25 to 54 years and a continued strong pace of immigration. Nominal wage growth has eased over the past year and the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, but labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation has eased notably over the past year, but remains above our longer run goal of 2%. Total PCE prices rose 2.7% over the 12 months ending in March. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.8%. The inflation data received so far this year have been higher than expected. Although some measures of short-term inflation expectations have increased in recent months, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. The committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings, though at a slower pace. Over the past year, as labor market tightness has eased and inflation has declined, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have moved toward better balance. The economic outlook is uncertain, however, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. We've stated that we do not expect that it will be appropriate to reduce the target range for the federal funds rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. So far this year, the data have not given us that greater confidence. In particular, and as I noted earlier, readings on inflation have come in above expectations. It is likely that gaining such greater confidence will take longer than previously expected. We are prepared to maintain the current target range for the federal funds rate for as long as appropriate. We're also prepared to respond to an unexpected weakening in the labor market. We know that reducing policy restraint too soon or too much could result in a reversal of the progress we've seen on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering any adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Policy is well positioned to deal with the risks and uncertainties that we face in pursuing both sides of our dual mandate. We will continue to make decisions meeting by meeting. Turning to our balance sheet, the committee decided at today's meeting to slow the pace of decline in our securities holdings, consistent with the plans we released previously. Specifically, the cap on Treasury redemptions will be lowered from the current $60 billion per month to $25 billion as of June 1. Consistent with the committee's intention to hold primarily Treasury securities in the longer run, we're leaving the cap on agency securities unchanged per month, and we will reinvest any proceeds in excess of this cap in Treasury securities. With principal payments on agency securities currently running at about $15 billion per month, total portfolio runoff will amount to roughly $40 billion per month. The decision to slow the pace of runoff does not mean that our balance sheet will ultimately shrink by less than it would otherwise, but rather allows us to approach its ultimate level more gradually. In particular, slowing the pace of runoff will help ensure a smooth transition, reducing the possibility that money markets experience stress and thereby facilitating the ongoing decline in our securities holdings that are consistent with reaching the appropriate level of ample reserves. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Here we go. GDP.
Thank you. Howard Schneider with Reuters. A question to follow up, if I could. Do you consider the current policy rate still, are you confident that it's sufficiently restricted to get inflation back to 2%?
So I do think the evidence shows, pretty clearly that policy is restrictive and is weighing on demand. And there are a few places I would point to for that. You can start with the labor market. So demand is still strong, the demand side of the labor market in particular, but it's cooled from its extremely high level of a couple of years ago. And you see that in job openings. You saw more evidence of that today in the JOLTS report, as you'll know. It's still higher than pre-pandemic, but it has been coming down both in the Indeed report and in the JOLTS report. That's demand cooling. The same is true of quits and hiring rates, which have essentially normalized. I also look at we look at surveys of workers and pardon me, surveys of workers and businesses and ask workers, are jobs plentiful? And ask businesses, are workers plentiful? Is it easy to find workers? And you've seen that the answers to those have come back down to pre-pandemic levels. You also see in interest-sensitive spending like housing and investment, you also see that higher interest rates are weighing on those activities. So I do think it's clear that that policy is restrictive.
Sufficiently restrictive, I guess.
So I would say that we believe it is restrictive, and we believe over time it will be sufficiently restrictive. That will be a question that that the data will have to answer.
So
they're not raising.
If inflation
Pardon me.
continues running roughly sideways as it has been, the job market stays reasonably strong, unemployment low, and expectations are anchored and maintained, would you disrupt that for
Expectations are not anchored.
or anchored
Or anchored.
stable roughly? Would you disrupt that for the last half point on PCE?
You know, I don't want to get into complicated hypotheticals, but I would say that, you know, we're committed to retaining our current restrictive stance of policy for as long as is appropriate, and we'll do that.
Cheers, Jerome. Drink some water.
Thanks for taking our questions, Chair Powell. I wonder, you know, obviously, Michelle Bowman has been saying that there is a risk that rates may need to increase further, although it's not her baseline outlook. I wonder if you see that as a risk as well. And if so, what change in conditions would merit considering raising rates at this point?
So I think it's unlikely that the next policy rate move will be a hike. I'd say it's unlikely.
Unlikely.
You know, our policy focus is really what I just mentioned, which is how long to keep policy restrictive. You ask, what would it take? You know, I think we'd need to see persuasive evidence that our policy stance is not sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation sustainably down to 2% over time. That's not what we think we're seeing, as I mentioned. But that's something like that is what it would take. We'd look at the totality of the data, answer to that question. That would include inflation expectations, and all the other data too. Well, I think, again, the test, what I'm saying is if we were to come to that conclusion that policy weren't tight enough to achieve that, so it would be the totality of all the things we'd be looking at. It could be expectations, it could be a combination of things. But if we reach that conclusion and we don't see evidence supporting that conclusion, that's what it would take, I think, for us to take that step.
Thank you, Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. You didn't mention the idea that rates are at a peak for the cycle, and didn't mention the idea that it might be appropriate to cut rates later this year, as you have at previous press conferences. So has the Fed sort of dropped its easing bias? Where are you standing on that?
So on, let me address cuts. So obviously, our decisions that we make on our policy rate are going to depend on the incoming data, how the outlook is evolving, and the balance of risks, as always. And we'll look at the totality of the data. So I think, and we think, that policy is well positioned to address different paths that the economy might take. And we've said that we don't think it would be appropriate to dial back our restrictive policy stance until we've gained greater confidence that inflation is moving down sustainably toward 2%. So, for example, let me take a path. If we did have a path where inflation proves more persistent than expected and where the labor market remains strong, but inflation is moving sideways and we're not gaining greater confidence, well, that would be a case in which it could be appropriate to hold off on rate cuts.
Wow.
I think there's also other paths that the economy could take, which would cause us to want to consider rate cuts. And those would be two of those paths would be that we do gain greater confidence, as we've said, that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%. And another path could be, an unexpected weakening in the labor market, for example. So
unemployment
those
rate.
are paths in which you could see us cutting rates. So I think
Talked about that.
It really will depend on the data. In terms of peak rate, I think really it's the same question. I think the data will have to answer that question for us.
Pat myself on my back
Just
here.
follow on the path where you might not cut. Is that, you mentioned that it would be inflation persistent. I mean, is inflation, would that be the key data in making that decision, or could you expand a bit more on that? Thank you.
Again, we've set ourselves a test that for us to begin to reduce policy restriction, we'd want to be confident that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%. And for sure, one of the things we'd be looking at is the performance of inflation. We'd also be looking at inflation expectations. We'd be looking at the whole story, but clearly incoming inflation data would be at the very heart of that decision.
Nick Timrose of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, to what extent has the easing in financial conditions since November contributed to the reacceleration in growth? And do you now expect a period of sustained tighter financial conditions will be needed to resume the sort of disinflation the economy saw last year?
So I think it's hard to know that. I think we'll be able to look back, from down the road and look back and understand it better. If you look at, let's look at growth. Really, what we've seen so far this year in the first quarter is growth coming in about consistent with where it was last year. I know GDP came in lower, but you don't see an acceleration in growth. I mean, the thought would be that financial conditions loosened in December, and that caused an uptick in activity, and that caused inflation. Presumably, that's what we're tightening in the labor market. You don't really see that happening. What you see is economic activity at a level that's roughly the same as last year. So, what's causing this inflation, we'll have a better sense of that over time. I don't know that there's an obvious connection there, though, with the easing of financial conditions. In terms of tightening, you're right. I mean, rates are certainly higher now and have been for some time than they were before the December meeting, and they're higher, and that's tighter financial conditions, and that's appropriate given what inflation has done in the first quarter.
You've said in the past that stronger growth wouldn't necessarily preclude rate cuts. I wonder, would continued strength in the labor market change your view about the appropriate stance of policy if it was accompanied by signs that wage growth was reaccelerating?
So I just want to be careful that we don't target wage growth or the labor market. And remember what we saw last year: very strong growth, a really tight labor market, and a historically fast decline in inflation. So and that's because we know there are two forces at work here. There's the unwinding of the pandemic-related supply side distortions and demand side distortions, and there's also monetary policy, restrictive monetary policy. So I wouldn't rule out that something like that can continue. I wouldn't give up at this point on further things happening on the supply side, either because we do see that that companies still report that there are supply side issues that they're facing, and also even when the supply side issues are solved, it should take some time for that to affect economic activity and ultimately inflation. So there are still those things. So I don't like to say that either either growth or a strong labor market in and of itself would automatically create problems on inflation, because of course it didn't do that last year. You ask about wages. We also don't target wages. We target price inflation. It is one of the inputs. The point with wages is, of course, we like everyone else like to see high wages, but we also want to see them not eaten up by high inflation. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to cool the economy and work with what's happening on the supply side to bring the economy back to 2% inflation. Part of that will probably be having wage increases move down incrementally toward levels that are more sustainable.
Rachel. Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. You talked about needing time to gain more confidence that inflation is sustainably moving back down to 2%. It's May now. Do you have time this year to cut 3 times, just given the calendar?
Yeah, I'm not really thinking of it that way. What we've said is that we need to be more confident, and we've said, my colleagues and I today said, that we didn't see progress in the first quarter, and I've said that it appears then that it's going to take longer for us to reach that point of confidence. So I don't know how long it'll take. I can just say that when we get that confidence, then rate cuts will be in scope, and I don't know exactly when that will be.
And with hindsight, are there any signs that you can look back on now, looking at the reports from January or February or March, that suggested something more worrying than just expected bumpiness?
Not really. So I thought it was appropriate to reserve judgment until we had the full quarter's data, until we saw the March data. And so take a step back. What do we now see in the first quarter? We see strong economic activity. We see a strong labor market, and we see inflation. We see 3 inflation readings. So I think you're at a point there where you should take some signal. We don't like to react to 1 or 2 months data, but this is a full quarter. And I think it's appropriate to take signal now, and we are taking signal. And the signal that we're taking is that it's likely to take longer for us to gain confidence that we are on a sustainable path down to 2% inflation. That's the signal that we're taking.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could, Steve Leisman, CNBC, if I could follow up on that. What particular areas were sort of temporary or blips in the inflation data in the first quarter? And what's the dynamic by which you expect them to work out in the coming months and quarters?
Yeah. So we will, we will put the thing, we have put the thing under a microscope. I will say nothing is going to come out of that that's going to change the view. I think that, in fact, we didn't gain confidence and that it's going to take longer to get that confidence. But confidence, I just think, you know the story. What's happened since December is you've seen higher goods inflation than expected, and you've seen higher non-housing services inflation than expected, and those two are working together to sort of be higher than we had thought. And there are stories behind how that happened, and I think my expectation is that we will, over the course of this year, see inflation move back down. That's my forecast. I think my confidence in that is lower than it was because of the data that we've seen.
Wow.
So we're looking at those things. We also continue to expect, and I continue to expect, that housing services inflation, given where market rents are, those will show up in measured housing services inflation over time. We believe that it will. It looks like that there are substantial lags between when lower market rates turned up and for new tenants, and when it shows up for existing tenants or for in housing services. So,
if I could just follow up, is there a bit of a contradiction in the idea that you are reducing quantitative tightening, which is sort of an easing, while you're holding rates steady at a restrictive rate to try to slow and cool the economy and inflation? Thank you.
I wouldn't say that. No, I mean the active tool of monetary policy is, of course, interest rates, and this is a plan we've long had in place to slow, really not in order to provide accommodation to the economy, but to be less restrictive to the economy. It really is to ensure that the process of shrinking the balance sheet down to where we want to get it is a smooth one and doesn't wind up with financial market turmoil the way it did the last time we did this, and the only other time we've ever done this.
Wow.
Boris from Bloomberg. 2 questions. First, simple one. Given the run of data since March, has the probability in your mind of no cuts this year increased or stayed the same? That's the first question. Second question. Chair Powell, you joined the board in 2012, and I'm sure you remember, as I do, what the jobless recovery was like. Lawyers, accountants, all kinds of highly qualified people who couldn't get jobs. And given your history there, I wonder if there's an argument for being more patient with inflation here. We have strong productivity growth that's helping wages go up. We have good employment. And so it seems to me there's a lot of hysteria about inflation. I agree, it's, nobody likes it, but is there an argument for being patient and working with the economic cycle to get it down over time? Thank you.
So on your first question, I don't have a probability estimate for you, but all I can say is that, we've said that we didn't think it'd be appropriate to cut until we were more confident that inflation was moving sustainably at 2%. We didn't get our confidence in that didn't increase in the first quarter. And in fact, what really happened was we came to the view that it will take longer to get that confidence. And I think there are, I think it's the economy has been very hard for forecasters broadly to predict its path, but there are paths to not cutting, and there are paths to cutting. It's really going to depend on the data. In terms of the employment mandate, to your point, if you go back a couple of years, our sort of framework document says that when you look at the two mandate goals, and if one of them's further away from goal than the other, then you focus on that one. It's the time to get back there times the times how far it is from the goal, and that was clearly inflation. So our focus was very much on inflation, and this is what we referred to in the statement. As inflation has come down now to below 3% on a 12-month basis, it's become we're now focusing the other goal, the employment goal, now comes back in to focus, and so we are focusing on it, and that's how we think about that.
Bloomberg asked the right question here.
Financial Times. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to ask the questions. Just to go back to the answer before the previous one, it seemed to suggest that you think the likeliest path of inflation is one that's going to allow you to have a situation where rates are lower at the end of the year than they are right now. It'd be good if you could just confirm whether or not that's a correct reading. And the Q1 GDP print has led to some to start mentioning the term stagflation with respect to the US economy.
Here we go.
Do you or anyone else on the FOMC think this is now a risk? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not dealing really in likelihoods. I think there are paths that the economy can take that would involve cuts, and there are paths that wouldn't. And I don't have great confidence in which of those paths. I think I would say my personal forecast is that we will begin to see further progress on inflation this year. I don't know that it will be sufficient. I don't know that it won't. I think we're going to have to let the data lead us on that. In terms of your second question was stagflation. I guess I would say I was around for stagflation, and it was 10% unemployment. It was high single digits inflation. Right now we have and very slow growth. So right now we have 3% growth, which is pretty solid growth, I would say, by any measure, and we have inflation running under 3%. So I don't really understand where that's coming from. And in addition, I would say most forecasters, including our forecasting, was that last year's level of growth was very high, 3.4% in, I guess, the fourth quarter, and probably not going to be sustained and would come down. But that would be our forecast. That wouldn't be stagflation. That would still be to a very healthy level of growth.
Jerome Powell's like, stagflation.
We will return inflation to 2%, and that won't be. So I don't see the stag or the inflation.
What are you talking about, stagflation? Oh man.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Radio and Television. The vice chair of the FOMC said recently that he's willing to consider the idea that potential growth has moved up. And of course, he's Mr. Potential Growth, our star. Do you share that view? And would that imply that maybe policy isn't tight enough?
So I think I would take that question this way. We saw a year of very high productivity growth in 2023. And we saw a year of, I think, negative productivity growth in 2022. So I think it's hard to draw from the data. The question is, will productivity run? There are two questions. One is, will productivity run, persistently above its longer run trend? I don't think we know that. In terms of potential output, though, if that's a separate question, we've had what amounts to a significant increase in the potential output of the economy. That's not about productivity. It was about having more labor, frankly, both through in 2023, both through participation, also through immigration. So we're very much like other forecasters and economists getting our arms around what that means for potential output this year and next year. and last year for that matter too. So I think in that case, I think you really do have a significant increase in potential output, but you've also got, so you've got more supply, but those people also come in, they work, they have jobs, they spend. So you've also got demand. So it may be that you get more supply than you get demand at the beginning, but ultimately it should be neither inflationary nor disinflationary over a longer period.
Well, you said earlier that at this point, you're not really considering rate increases. If growth is higher, but you're not considering rate increases, does that imply that you're more worried about causing the economy to slow too much than you are about inflation taking off again?
No, I think we believe our policy stance is in a good place and is appropriate to the current situation. We believe it's restrictive. And, our evidence for that I went over earlier. You see it in the labor market, you see it in inflation sensitive spending, where demand has clearly come down a lot over the past few years. And that's more from monetary policy, whereas the supply side things that are happening are more on the supply side. So that's how I would think about it.
The market's reacting very well to Jerome Powell right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence from Fox Business. So GDP growth is about 2%. Inflation, employment is about 4%. It feels a lot like a steady state, and we have 3% inflation. So if the data remains the same that you're seeing, and I know you said you don't see a rate hike, but it stands to reason that you would need a rate hike to get from 3 to 2% inflation. So was there any discussion about a rate hike in today's meeting? And are you satisfied with 3% inflation for the rest of the year?
Well, of course, we're not satisfied with 3% inflation. 3% can't be in a sentence with satisfied. So we will return inflation to 2% over time, but over time. And we think our policy stance is appropriate to do that. So if we were to conclude that policy is not sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation sustainably down to 2%, then that would be what it would take for us to want to increase rates. We don't see that. We don't see evidence for that. So that's where we are.
Was there a discussion about a rate hike at all?
So the policy focus has really been on what to do about holding the current level of restriction. That's part of the policy. That's where the policy discussion was in the meeting.
I wanted to follow on the 3%. Is there a time frame of persistent inflation that would trigger a rate hike?
There isn't any rule. You can't look to a rule. These are going to be judgment calls. Clearly restrictive monetary policy needs more time to do its job. That is pretty clear based on what we're seeing.
He gets so sassy towards the end of the press conference.
It's going to depend on the totality of the data, how the outlook evolves.
3% is not our target. Duh. Satisfied?
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. You've talked about your commitment to being apolitical and nonpartisan, and I was just wondering, given that it's an election year, is the bar for rate changes higher close to an election? And similarly, is there a significant economic difference between, starting to cut in, say, September versus December?
Ooh.
So we're always going to do what we think the right thing for the economy is when we come to that consensus view that it's the right thing to do for the economy. That's our record. That's what we do. We're not looking at anything else. It's hard enough to get the economics right here. These are difficult things. And if we were to take on a whole nother set of factors and use that as a new filter, it would reduce the likelihood we'd actually get the economics right. So that's how we think about it around here. And, we're at peace over it. We know that we'll do what we think is the right thing when we think it's the right thing, and we'll all do that. And that's how everybody around here thinks. So I can't say it enough that we just don't go down that road. If you go down that road, where do you stop? And we're not on that road. We're on the road where we're serving all the American people and making our decisions based on the data and how those data affect the outlook and the balance of risks.
And then is there a significant difference between, whether you start in, say, September versus December?
There's a significant difference between an institution that takes into account all sorts of political events and one that doesn't. That's where the significant difference is. And
he's sassy.
We just don't do that. I mean, you can go back and read the transcripts forever.
He's so mad.
Fourth presidential election here. Read all the transcripts and see if anybody mentions in any way the pending election. It just isn't part of our thinking.
We all wanted to ask that question about the election,
down
right?
that road. I don't know how you stop. So.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Question about the labor market. You've mentioned a few times that the labor market is normalizing. Certainly today's JOLTS data suggested that things are kind of getting back to pre-pandemic levels. One thing that hasn't normalized is wage growth, which is still quite a bit stronger than before the pandemic. I wonder if you can share your analysis of why that's happening. Is it a lagging indicator or something else going on?
So I think if you go back to where wages peaked, wage increases peaked a couple, 3 years ago, essentially all wage measures have come down substantially to that. But they are not down to where they were before the pandemic. They're still roughly a percentage point higher. And we've seen pretty consistent progress, but not uniformly. And you'll note the ECI reading from Tuesday was expected to have come down, and essentially it was flat year over year, I think roughly. So yeah, I mean, that part of it is bumpy. And again, we don't target wage increases, but in the longer run, if you have wage increases running higher than productivity would warrant, and then there will be inflationary pressures. Employers will raise prices over time if that's the case. So we've seen progress. It has been inconsistent, but we have seen a substantial decline overall. But we have ways to go on that.
Consumers are feeling the weight of interest rates right now. Mortgage rates are up, as are rates for car loans, credit cards. People looking to borrow are very discouraged. That's reflected in their views on the economy. What would you say to them?
Well, the thing that hurts everybody, and particularly people in the lower income brackets, is inflation. If you're a person who's living paycheck to paycheck and suddenly all the things you buy, the fundamentals of life go up in price, you are in trouble right away. And so with those people in mind in particular, what we're doing is we're using our tools to bring down inflation. It will take some time, but we will succeed, and we will bring inflation back down to 2%, and then people won't have to worry about it again. That's what we're doing, and we know that it's painful and inconvenient, but the dividends will be paid will be very large, and everyone will share in those dividends. And we've made quite a lot of progress if you can think about it. I think headline core PCE peaked at 5.8. Now it's headline peaked at 7.1. Now it's at 2.7. Don't want to get that wrong.
No, you don't. Quick follow-up. Are current interest rates really doing that much, though, to fight inflation right now for those consumers?
Yes. I mean, I think that restrictive monetary policy is doing what it's supposed to do. But it's also, in this case, unusually working alongside and with the healing of the supply side. That was different this time was that a big part of the source of the inflation, and the reason why we're having this conversation, is that we had this supply side kind of collapse with shortages and bottlenecks and all that kind of thing. And this was to do with the shutting down and reopening of the economy and other things that really raised demand. So many factors did that. So I think now you see those two things working together, the reversal of those supply and demand distortions from the pandemic and the response to it, along with restrictive monetary policy. Those two things are working to bring down inflation, and we've made a lot of progress. Let's remember how far we've come. We have a ways to go. We've got work left to do, but we're not looking at the very high inflation rates that we were seeing 2 years ago.
Courtney Brown from Axios. Thanks for taking our questions, Chair Powell. I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned earlier on housing inflation. There's kind of been this long-awaited disinflation in shelter that still hasn't arrived. So I guess two questions. How do you explain the substantial lags between some of the private sector data we're seeing and the government data? And how confident are you that rents will be helpful on the inflation front in the coming months?
So essentially, there are a number of places in the economy where there are just lag structures built into the inflation process, and housing is one of them. So when you have when someone a new person goes to rent an apartment, that's called market rent, and you can see market rents are barely going up at all. The inflation in those has been very low, but it takes before that they were incredibly high. They sort of led the high part. So what happens is those market rents take years actually to get all the way into rents for tenants who are rolling over their leases. Landlords don't tend to charge as much of an increase to a rollover tenant for whatever reason. And what that does is it builds up a sort of an unrealized portion of increases when there have been big increases. And what happens is, it's complicated, but the story is it just takes some time for that to get in. Now, I am confident that as long as market rents remain low, this is going to show up in measured inflation, assuming that market rents do remain low. What will be the exact timing of it? I think we've learned that the lags are longer. We now think significantly longer than we thought at the beginning. And so confident that it will come, but not so confident in the timing of it. But yes, I expected that this will happen.
Thanks.
Consumer confidence, somebody asked.
Thank you, Chair Powell, for taking the questions. This is Nicholas Jasinski from Barron's Magazine. It seems that over the past 3 or 4 years, economies and central banks in developed markets at least have been on more or less the same trajectory, easing during the pandemic, fighting inflation with restrictive policy on the way out. Feels like that may be ending in 2024 based on some of the economic data from Europe and the US and Japan and statements from those central banks as well. So my question is, what considerations or risks does a period of more divergent global economic trajectories and central bank policies present for the FOMC?
So that you're right. I think that may happen, and you know that we all serve domestic mandates, right? So I think the difference between the United States and other countries that are now considering rate cuts is that they're just not having the kind of growth we're having. They have their inflation is performing about like ours or maybe a little better, but they're not experiencing the kind of growth we're experiencing. So we actually have the luxury of having strong growth and a strong labor market, very low unemployment, high job creation, and all of that. And we can be patient, and we'll be careful and cautious as we approach the decision to cut rates. Whereas I think other jurisdictions may go before that. In terms of the implications, I think obviously markets see it coming. It's priced in now, and so I think the markets and economies can adapt to it. And I think we haven't seen, in addition for the emerging market economies, we haven't seen the kind of turmoil that was more frequent 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And that's, I think, partly because emerging market countries, many of them have much better monetary policy frameworks, much more credibility on inflation. And so they're navigating this pretty well this time.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo Finance. You sort of backed away from the notion that the economy would need to encounter pain for inflation to come back down. But given sticky inflation data in the first quarter, can disinflation still happen along a relatively painless path for the economy? Or is some softening in the labor market and the economy likely needed to bring inflation back down?
So you're right. I think we thought, and most people thought there would have to be probably significant dislocations somewhere in the economy, perhaps the labor market, to get inflation all the way down from the very high levels it was at the beginning of this episode. That didn't happen. That's a tremendous result. We're very, of course, gratified and pleased that hasn't happened. And if you look at the dynamics that enabled that, it really was that so much of the gain was from the unwinding of things that weren't to do with monetary policy, but the unwinding of the distortions to the economy, supply side problems, and also some demand issues as well. The unwinding of those really helped inflation come down. Now, as I've said, I'm not giving up on that. So I think it is possible that those forces will still work to help us bring inflation down. We can't be guaranteed that that's true though. And so, we're trying to use our tools in a way that keeps the labor market strong and the economy strong, but also helps bring inflation back down to 2% sustainably. We will bring inflation down to 2% sustainably. We hope we can do it without significant dislocations in the labor market or elsewhere.
And speaking of dislocations in the labor market, in terms of cutting, you said if there were weakness in the job market, that could be a reason to cut rates. So if the unemployment rate were to tick above 4%, but inflation not back down to your 2% target, how would you look at that? Would the unemployment rate popping back above 4%?
Great question. Finally.
I said an unexpected weakening is the way I characterize it. So, and I'm not going to try to define exactly what I mean by that, but it had to be meaningful and get our attention and lead us to think that the labor market was really significantly weakening for us to want to react to it.
That's what I was talking about earlier.
The unemployment rate would probably not do that, but it would be a broader thing that would suggest that it would be appropriate to consider cutting. And I think whether you decide to cut will depend on all the facts and circumstances, not just that one.
I'm going to show you guys the unemployment data later on.
Kyle Campbell with American Banker. You've said that broad and material changes are needed for the Basel III Endgame proposal, and you've mentioned that a reproposal is something that's on the table. As you've had more time to sort of sit with the public commentary, process that, and understand the options available to you, do you have a better sense of whether a reproposal will be necessary? And do you have a timeline in mind for when some sort of movement will be made on that front, either a reproposal or a move to finalize?
So let me start by saying that the Fed is committed to, completing this process and carrying out Basel III Endgame in a way that's faithful to Basel and also comparable to what the other large comparable jurisdictions are doing. We haven't made any decisions on policy or on process at all. Nothing. No decisions have been made. I'll say again, though, if we conclude that reproposal is appropriate, we won't hesitate to insist on that.
And then do you need to resolve issues with the capital proposal in order to advance other parts of the regulatory agenda, or do you expect to continue to make progress on those other agenda items?
There's no mechanical rule in place there, but I would say that the Basel III process is by far the most important thing, and really is, I think, occupying us at this time in terms of what we're moving ahead with.
Let's go to Mark for the last question.
Thank you, Mark Hamrick.
Last
with,
question.
Bankrate. Mr. Chairman, what can you tell us about the approach that you take with your role in the sense of trying to achieve consensus, which you recently identified as a priority, while allowing for a range of views or even dissent? We don't see many dissenting votes in the official statements, even when more spirited discussions are noted in the minutes after the fact. How do you avoid groupthink and avoid a higher risk of a policy mistake? Thank you.
So I think if you listen to, and you all do, listen to my 18 colleagues on the FOMC, you'll see that we do not lack for a diversity of voices and perspectives. We really don't. And it's one of the great aspects of the Federal Reserve System. We have 12 reserve banks around the country where they have their own economic staff, not the people who work here at the board. They're different people, and so each reserve bank has its own culture around monetary policy and its own approach and that kind of thing. It guarantees you a diversity of perspectives. So I think that the perspectives are very diverse. But and in terms of dissents, we have dissents, and a thoughtful dissent is a good thing. If someone really makes you think, that kind of thing. But all I can say from my standpoint is I listen carefully to people. I try to incorporate their thinking, or do everything I can to incorporate their thinking into what we're doing. And I think many people, if they feel that's happening, that for most people, most of the time, that'll be enough. But I'm not. It's not frowned upon or illegal or against the rules or anything like that. It just is the way things come out, and I mean, I think we have a very diverse group around the table, frankly, more diverse than it used to be in many dimensions, more diverse from the obvious, gender and demographic ways, but also we have more people who are not PhD economists. So we have people from business and law and academia and things like that. So I think you actually do have quite a good diverse perspective. I think all of us read these stories about a lack of diversity, and we look around the room and say, "I don't understand. I really don't understand what they're talking about." So, but I get the question now. Thank you very much.
Okay, so about an hour long, as usual. So I'm gonna go ahead and share some of the things that I want to share you guys what he was talking about here. Okay, so PC inflation, right? This is something that he has been talking about throughout the press conference. He wants this rate to come down to 2%. He said it so many times that this is going to go down to 2%. And from what we're seeing, right, from December, 2.6, 2.5, 2.5. And by February, it seemed like it was heading to the right direction. Now, March went back up to 2.7. So now Jerome Powell and all the Fed governors, they're like, all right, maybe we're trending into the wrong direction. Okay. So when he said in the press conference that the policy is 2%, this is what he was talking about. He wants this to get to 2%. Now, is he going to start cutting rates at, let's say, 2.1%? Possibly. But it looks to me, or it sounds to me like he wants this rate, personal consumption expenditures price index, this PC price index, to get down to 2% before he even starts cutting. Now, the risk is that the PC inflation, all right, let's say it comes down to 2%. What does that do to the unemployment rate, right? So unemployment right now at 3.8%, going back up to 4%. Historically speaking, it's always been like around between 4 and 5%. I would say 4% is pretty healthy. 3%, is excellent, right? I don't think I've seen below 3% in my lifetime. I don't know, but around 2018, 2019, that's when we started to see unemployment rate at 3%, and then that's when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to make sure that it doesn't overheat the economy. But anyway, that's what they're talking about. All the reporters, they were asking questions is that, hey, if we keep the rates where it is now, right, 5.25, 5.5%, and the inflation comes down to, let's say, 2.3, 2.2, but what if unemployment rate shoots up to 4.5 or 4.6, and any weaknesses in the labor market? Jerome Powell pretty much said that, we're just paying attention to the PC inflation. We are paying attention to the labor market, but we're not going to make any changes unless we see a sudden change in the labor data, right? So if we see something outrageous like 4% to 4.5%, that is a significant increase. You got to realize that it's tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people when you think about the percentage-wise when it comes to unemployment. So if it goes from 4% to 4.5, like we saw during the global recession in 2008, 2009, then that should trigger the Fed and say, whoa, hold on, are we doing too much where maybe we need to cut the rates by 25 or 50 basis points? They're not going to cut the rates by 200 basis points or 300 basis points all at the same time. It's not going to happen. But that's what he was talking about, just to put things in the context, okay? Now, I said this at the beginning of the live stream. So the next inflation report, CPI data, comes out on the same day the Fed announces their decision on interest rates. So that's on June 12th at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's when we're going to get inflation data. Right now it's at 3.5%. If that's going to come down to 3.3, 3.2, or if it's going to remain the same. If it remains hot, then they're most likely not going to cut rate. But check this out. CME is already talking about raising the possibility of raising interest rates by another 25 basis points. So this is let me zoom out here. This is the June 2024, June 12th FOMC meeting. So they're saying that there's a 90% chance that the rates will remain the same at 5.25 to 5.5%. And then there's a 9.1% chance that the rates will come down by 25 basis points. And there's a 0.7% chance that they become hawkish and raise the rates to bring inflation back down. So what, chances of that happening, like Jerome Powell said earlier, it's very unlikely. Those were his words, that the hike at the next meeting is unlikely. Okay. Now, what if inflation comes out, let's say 3.5 to 3.8% going back up, and PCE inflation goes from 2.7% to, let's say, 3%, right? Now you got a big jump in inflation going into the summertime, going May, June, July, August. Those are the months that American people spend spend a lot of money on travel, all of that, right? Then they could consider and say, you know what, this is too hot. We need to calm everybody down from spending, and housing is one of the biggest contributing factors to why inflation continues to go up. So they could just say, we're going to increase the rates by 25 basis points. The market is certainly going to freak out momentarily, and they're going to sell off like crazy, probably just for the day, if they raise interest rates. We'll see. Is that going to happen? Don't know. It's going to depend on the data, and that's why I go do live stream every time CPI comes out, every time the FOMC has that meeting, and every time I go over summary of economic projections. That's going to come out in June, right? So let me pull that up real quick. I was reading this during the press conference. Some of the questions were stupid. So take a look at this. Okay, so this report comes out every quarter. So if you don't know what this is called summary of economic projections. So this comes out of the FOMC meeting every quarter. So the last one that came out was March 20th. Okay, so March 20th, before the PCE inflation came out at 2.7%. So they were projecting that PCE inflation for the year at 2024. Do you see this? I can't really mark it on just on the website, but take a look at third one from the top. It says PCE inflation. So at 2.4% for 2024. We're at 2.7. I'm sorry. Are we on 2.6? Yeah, we're on 2.7 right now. So 2.4 will be the average throughout 2024, maybe finishing it. If that doesn't get down to 2.4 by June, they might raise that and just say it's going to go from 2.4 to 2.5, maybe 2.6. We'll see, right? In 2025, they're projecting the PCE inflation to go to 2.2 and then possibly going to 2.0. I mean, if that's what they're saying, that the rates might not come down until 2026 with the 2% PCE inflation, they could very well keep the rates where they are throughout 2024 and then slowly cut in 2025 if it gets to 2.2 to 2.1%. That's my own assessment. Please don't take my word for it and say, Sai said this is what's gonna happen, so I'm gonna do this, and that. All right. This is just my own assessment. I do this, right? I read this probably way too much. But anyway, here's something else that is a little concerning, is the GDP, right? If you look at the top line here, change in real GDP, December projection was 1.4 for the year 2024. Quarter one came in at 1.6 as opposed to 2.4. So it's already lower than the original projection for Q1. So what if GDP remains at 1.6, 1.5? Does that mean they're gonna cut the rates? No, not necessarily, right? But if it does go down to below 1%, let's say Q3 GDP was at 0.8 and it goes down to 0.2. In 2025, we see a negative GDP for Q1 2025, and let's say it goes down to like negative 0.2, right? And then it goes to another negative 0.6. That's a recession. Now they got to take a look and see what's going on with the unemployment rate. What if the unemployment rate, if you look at the second from the top, it goes from 4% to 4.5%, like I said earlier, and it goes to 5%, goes to 5.5%. But PCE inflation remains at about 2.4, 2.3. Then the Fed might just say, we need to cut rates now because now we tightened that labor market way too much, and we need to cut the rates and businesses to start borrowing at a lower rate again, so they can retain their employees, do more contract work and all that stuff. If you look at the company earnings, right, they're coming in, generally speaking, they're coming in a lot lower than expected. So the earnings haven't been as good as we had hoped. We'll see what happens going into Q2, Q3, Q4, and then we'll see what happens with that. Okay. So the next FOMC meeting, write this down, June 12th, 5:30 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to get the CPI reading in the morning, and then they're going to make a decision on the interest rate at 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we're going to have the same press conference, and then we're going to hear more about what direction that they're going to go to, because after June 12th, we just have July 31st and then September 18th. We were going to just have 4 Fed meetings remaining, right? I know he said that he was a little irritated during the press conference when people were asking him about, well, we got the election here going on. What do you think that you're going to cut rates before the election day? Remember, election day is November 5th, and the FOMC meeting is November 7th. So a lot of people think that they're going to cut rates on September 18th, maybe by 25 or 50 basis points. He emphasized that elections, politics, everything will play no part in their decision-making process. Valid, okay, but perception is another thing. That's, perception is a whole different game, right? We also have to remember Jerome Powell was appointed by Trump. So if Trump says, I'm going to fire Jerome Powell if I get elected, but the next chairman is still going to act based on, supposed to, right? Based on in the best interest of the American people is what they say. But if you go back to 2018, if you guys remember, in September 2018, we had a stock market crash. The market was doing so well all the way till September. And then the Fed, Jerome Powell, came out of nowhere and said, we're going to raise rates. We're like, what? No reason, just going to raise rates. Stock market sell off. And Trump tweeted or X'd, whatever, and said, what the hell are you doing? I need you to cut the rates. In 2019, they cut the rates. So perception. It's going to be pretty interesting kind of going forward. This is something else that he was talking about, was the unemployment. So ignoring what had happened during COVID, right? It went to 14%. So going to here at 3.8, we've been pretty consistent at 3%. The reason is in COVID, a lot of people retired early. Baby boomers, some Gen Xers, they retired early from the workforce. So there's a shortage in the labor market. So for the longest time between 2021, 2022 here, and into just about right here, people were still hiring in certain sectors, right? But we're starting to see a little bit of weakness going into 2024 from all the layoffs that are happening because of the Fed funds rate that have been set in place since July 2023, right here. This was when July 2023 was when the Fed raised interest rates to 5.25 to 5.5, and it's been sitting there for a while. Now you see it's 3.5, 3.8, 3.7, and now it's at 3.9 and 3.8. If I had to guess, for the April data, which is coming out on Friday morning, that's probably going to go to about 4% unemployment. And we'll see what happens for May and June, because that could very well be going into 4.1, maybe 4.2%. We'll see what happens. Okay. This is going to be some really interesting. This is a very interesting 2024. That's all I got to say about that. So, yeah. Oh, what a press conference. You guys see that Jerome Powell just got really sassy in some of the questions. It's so funny. He does that to a lot of the questions he gets asked, and he doesn't hide them very well. It's so funny. But anyway, okay. I have a client meeting in about 25 minutes. Let me answer one more question. How do you know how much you need to invest to retire? How do I figure out if I can retire early? Okay. So hard. It is very hard to answer that question. How do you know how much you need to invest, right? So the first step, if you go to my website, firesidechat.com/resources, I have my financial independence checklist. The very first step is to know your FIRE number, so financial independence number. So financial independence number would be your total expenses multiplied by 25. And I also do the multiply by 3 for the cash reserve. It's either 2 or 3. I always do 3. So let's say your annual expenses in your retirement is going to be, pull up the calculator here. Where'd it go? Where's the calculator? There we go. So if it's like $50,000 a year, and you multiply by 25, then you would need $1.25 million invested. So you can withdraw 4% out of that 1.25 million, and assuming that the market does 7%, 8% annually, if you have like your allocations, let's say 90% stocks, 10% bonds, or something like that, theoretically speaking, that the portfolio should last, right? Now, I also add 3 to it because 50,000 multiplied by 3 years, that would be $150,000. Now, depending on how many streams of income you have, you could probably get away with just 2 years, right? Why 2 years? The longest recession that we had, as recent as 2008, 2009, that was about 19 months, right? So if you have a market downturn for 19 straight months, you don't want to pull money out of your portfolio at a loss, right? So you want to have that cash reserve on the side. And that's my FIRE plan, is to use my cash to pay for my expenses in my early retirement. And when the market goes back up, then I'm going to sell my investments and live on that and put and replenish my cash reserve. Okay. That makes sense so far? Now I'm going to pull up the, I have the financial independence calculator here. And that's not it. That's it. Okay. So this is what I call the FIRE calculator, and you can download it for free by visiting firesidechat.com/resources. And if you want to schedule a session with me, the first one with me is going to be free at firesidechat.com/coaching. So this is really, really easy to do. And it is a kind of give you an idea of how much you need to invest so that you can retire early, right? So you can put your birthday. I guess previous person put September 1st, 1990. Cool. So I'll put 1990, and you're 34 years old. And today's date, it automatically calculates what today's date is. Today is May 1st, 2024. And let's say you want to retire by 55. You want to retire early. Now, check this out. At the bottom of it, the 55, it's going to be visible. And I'm going to explain to you how that works. And I don't want to take too much of the time, but because there's already a video about this. And when you're 55 and you have 21 years until you hit your desired retirement age. So if you say you want to retire by 60, you put 60 on there, and it's going to calculate 26 years. You want to retire by 50, okay? Then it's going to, you have the 16-year time horizon. That's really, really important, right? So let's just go with 55. So if you have 55, on the right side, you want to put your current annual expenses. I'm going to go with today's dollars, right? So today's dollars, you can count either with mortgage or without the mortgage. And I'm going to say without the mortgage, that's the ideal situation by the time you retire early, is having $50,000 invest in your annual expenses. So you can put the annual inflation rate, despite what happened in 2022, you can just put 2.5%. You can put 3% if you want to. I'm just going to put 2.5%. So my annual expenses here, I'm going to draw it here. Right there where it says 76,000, that is adjusted by inflation in 21 years. That's where the calculator comes in really handy, so that you understand that, okay, I'm planning for 50,000, but I'm retiring in the year 2045 with the annual average inflation rate at 2.5%. Roughly, that's going to be increased to 76,250, right? You can always be conservative, or you can be more aggressive. It's really up to you. You can play around with the numbers. Okay. Now, On the left-hand side, where it says additional annual income, so additional income sources, you could be someone who wants to live on dividend income. You can put that on there too. I know a lot of you guys watching my channel are a fan of real estate. So if you have real estate invested, you can put what your net income is going to be, not your gross income. It needs to be your net income after all the expenses. So if you put, let's say, I'm going to make $20,000 a year in real estate income. Now your FIRE number gets reduced because you have income coming in from real estate or maybe from Social Security, right? But this is blacked out. This spreadsheet is awesome because it automatically blacks out because you put your desired retirement age at 55 and you can't collect Social Security until you're 62 as of right now, but that's going to be increased later on down the year. But you can always put like other income sources, like if you're a federal employee getting a federal pension, if you're a veteran or a military retiree, you can put military retirement pension or put your VA disability on there. And that's going to reduce your FIRE number, okay? Now, on the right side is what your total investments are currently. So total retirement excluding IRAs and your total non-retirement accounts. So that would be your taxable investments. And then traditional IRA and Roth IRA will be another part of it because IRAs have different rules from the 401k or TSP, right? And this is where you can put what you expect the average annual return is going to be. The S&P 500 for the last 10 years is about 12%. But, you know, I would be more on the conservative side and just go with 8%. You can even go down as low as 6% modestly, right? And then I'm going to leave the numbers where it is. But in the bottom, in the middle here, you see where right here, annual expenses multiplied by 25 and annual expenses multiplied by 2. I teach people 3 if you're a fat FIRE, but 2 if you're going to be lean FIRE or if you're going to be in the traditional FIRE. If you don't know what those are, just look it up on my YouTube page. Now, this is where it says today's dollars is going to be $750,000 because you have real estate income of $20,000 and you're going to need $750,000 in investment. Okay, let me delete that. Let me go to 0. Now it's going to turn into 1.25 million, right? That's pretty neat. Do you see that? It says $1.25 million will be changed because I deleted real estate net income. It's pretty neat. I've been using it, and we use it every single year to update our FIRE number to adjust for inflation. But anyway, on the left-hand side, it says FIRE cash reserve. That is exactly what it means, is that you want to have cash reserve set aside 12 months, 18 months. Some people want 24 months. I want 36 months because I am pursuing fat FIRE, right? Fat FIRE at a minimum, you need 2.5 million invested. And you could have, I don't know, like additional $300,000 in cash if you want to. Now, on the right side, this is where it's going to tell you how much you need to invest every year to get there and how much you need to invest every single month to get there. Now, let me put the caveat on this, okay? I want to make sure that you're aware that numbers do change. So you need to update your FIRE number every single year based on your inflation and your updated expenses. You can't know for sure what your FIRE number is going to be unless you do a budget. Do a budget. Millionaires budget. They do. All right. Billionaires probably hire someone else to do it. But millionaires, multimillionaires, they still budget because they know how much money is coming in, how much money is going out. We automate our savings completely. So if you tell me that it is completely impossible for you to save, and I'm giving you all these free tools to do, I don't know what else to tell you, right? But there's so many tools that you can download on my website. And get that FIRE calculator, start playing around with it. Give me some feedback. And you're like, you know, this, I kind of wish that you would do a little bit better with the whatever tools. Let me know. I mean, this is version 4, and I can always make version 5, make version 6, right? I'm trying to make things better. But check it out. This is going to be really helpful for you to calculate your FIRE number. That'll be your first step. And then the second step is to contribute, get a rainy day fund, have, you know, whatever your insurance deductibles are going to be. And then the next step is to get your 401k up to the employer match and then start paying that high interest debt. There's a checklist and you have the calculator all for you for free. So check it out when you get a chance. Really good question. So I appreciate you asking that. Okay, I do have to go. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I will be live streaming again in 2 weeks on Wednesday. It's either going to be at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, probably. I'll let you know, but you guys will get an email if you sign up on my website. And this has been awesome, and appreciate you guys all subscribing. I'm pretty close to 35,000, so have a good one.